So I'm back to do the nervous system today, and this is going to be exercise 13 in your lab book. And I am not going to go through the actual neuron, the model of the neuron, because I am going to post a picture of that, and I do have a thing link activity to that. So the model is pretty big, and it would be hard for me to hold up here. So you can go through that model. If you have any questions, just, again, feel free to contact me for the model of the neuron. It is obviously important that you understand the neuron before you get into the brain, which is full of neurons, right? So make sure that you go through that model. Again, sorry, you're seeing me same day I'm recording this video, so bear with me. But I want to show you just the model of the brain. I think it will be a little bit easier to go through if I go through the parts of the brain on the model, and then you can go through it. I do have some dissection videos, so you can see what it looks like in a dissection. So here is a brain model. And if you were in our lab, we would say obtain a human brain model. And I'm just going to go through the parts just like they go in your lab manual on page 145 so you can follow along with me. So the first structure that you would have to identify would be that you would have to identify what's called the gyrus. These elevated ridges on the surface of the brain are the gyrus. So they're like the hilltops, if you want to call them, or we call them gyri as plural. But so these are all the gyrus. And then the valleys in between are the sulci, or sulcus for singular. So those are the sulci, the valleys. So hopefully that helps you. Longitudinal fissure is going to be this big, large fissure that you see that separates the left and right hemisphere of the brain. So let's see if I can get this a little better there. And we have the cerebrum. The cerebrum is going to be this whole portion it's the majority of the brain, right? So this is all the cerebrum, all here. And then the cerebellum is going to be this portion back here. So right here is the cerebellum. But all of this is cerebrum. So all of this here, all of that is cerebrum. And the cerebrum can be broken up. That's, again, just to tell you actually what it does. It's where we call the seat of your higher intellectual activities. It's your intelligence, your higher intelligence. And this is going to be the portion of your brain that's involved with memory, speech, interpreting sensory input, initiating motor commands. So this is going to be the main control center for your body. And so we can break it up into different lobes. So we have the frontal lobe. I don't know how easy this is to really see here, but the frontal lobe is going to be this portion up here. Here's your frontal lobe. So you can see there's your frontal lobe. And then you can even see the central sulcus. That would kind of differentiate that as your frontal lobe. So there's frontal lobe. Then there's the parietal lobe. So this is kind of nice because it's just like the skull. You've got parietal lobe here. Then you have the temporal lobe down here. So here's temporal lobe. And occipital back here. And so you can go through. They give you some of the major functions of each lobe, like the frontal lobe controls motor functions, personality, creativity. So that's all frontal lobe here. Parietal lobe is going to be important for sensations for the body, sensory integration, things like proprioception. Proprioception tells you kind of where your limbs are in proportion to your body or in orientation to your body. So I love proprioception because when you look at kids and infants, they don't have this. So all of a sudden, they'll like pull up and they'll look at their hand. They'll be like, whoa, where did that come from? It's because they haven't developed that portion of the brain in the parietal lobes that's involved with proprioception. So they don't recognize where their hand is spatially from their body. So it's kind of interesting. And then the temporal lobes, one of their main functions is to process information for hearing, temporal lobe on either side there, temporal lobe. And then the occipital lobe is involved with visual processing. So important function of the occipital lobe. Then you can go ahead and get into the cerebellum. So this portion back here is the cerebellum. Here's cerebellum. All that. And the cerebellum coordinates skeletal muscle activity. So this helps to coordinate your muscular movements. And this is impaired when you are drinking a lot of alcohol. So you see this in people that have that impairment of the ability to coordinate their skeletal muscle movements, so they have trouble walking a line and things like that. That's why they do those activities. So maybe that will help you to remember that the cerebellum coordinates muscle activity. Those stories always helped me. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you the underside here so you can see these are the olfactory bulbs here, and then the olfactory tracts. So again, that's going to carry the information for your sense of smell. You guys probably know that. The optic nerve or the optic chiasma. So a little bit hard to see here, but here are the optic nerves right here coming out on either side of the pituitary. And if I could move the pituitary off to the side, you can see this crisscross X, which is called the optic chiasma, where the optic nerves crisscross there. So, and that's right underneath the pituitary gland. So that would be called the optic chiasma, and it forms this X. Let's see. And again, that's important because that's just, that obviously the optic nerve is carrying visual information to the brain. The thalamus. So this is where we'll have to open up on the inside here. You can see the thalamus is going to be this. I always say it looks like it kind of looks like an egg, right inside here. So this little circular structure here, you can see it here a little bit better on this half. So let it focus there. There's the thalamus, and the thalamus is going to be the relay center for all sensory input except for your sense of smell. And the reason is that your sense of smell is going to innervate a different area because it's coming up directly from through that cribriform plate. So it's not coming up. It's entering through the brain through a different means. So it's being relayed differently in the brain than the rest of your sensory input. So there's the thalamus, so kind of interesting. So yeah, the thalamus will be the relay center for all sensory input except for your sense of smell. Then you have the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is going to be this gland that hangs down here. So remember when we talked about the sella turcica? That was that saddle that you found in the sphenoid bone. So that's because its function was to house this structure, the pituitary gland, that sits down here. And the pituitary gland is going to be very important for the endocrine system. It is involved with releasing hormones that control many, many different body functions, so we'll get into that. So pituitary gland is very important. And then right above the pituitary gland, your lab mentions it, but it doesn't have it listed there, is the hypothalamus. So, and the diencephalon, when you talk about the diencephalon, consists of the thalamus and the hypothalamus here. So there's thalamus, hypothalamus. Let's see, corpus callosum. So this is going to be this white portion here. Right here is going to all be corpus callosum. Sorry if I can stay on it. That's corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is very important because it connects the two halves of the brain, two hemispheres of the brain. So the corpus callosum that's its main function. The pineal gland, which is not depicted well, it's this little pink structure here. It's not depicted well in these models, but here would be where the pineal gland would be. Again, just kind of anterior of the cerebellum. Oh, and this is the cerebellum on the inside here, so you can see just to orient you. That it's always easiest to orient if you know where the cerebellum is. So if you look, the pineal gland is going to be just kind of posterior here of the thalamus and anterior of the cerebrum. So there's the pineal gland. Let's see, and the pineal gland is important because it produces melatonin. So that helps to regulate our biological clock, right? Our circadian rhythms. So very important, helping regulate our sleep cycles and things like that. The brain stem. So this is going to be the brain stem here. This is going to be the brain stem. So, and we can break up the brain stem into 3 parts. The midbrain here, and the pons here, and then the medulla oblongata here. So those are the 3 parts. Again, midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata all make up the brain stem. And they all have different functions. Midbrain is mainly kind of relaying information from, midbrain here, relaying information here on from the pons into the cerebrum. So here's midbrain. And then here's the pons. The pons, again, connects the brain with the lower central nervous system with information coming in through the medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is sometimes what we call our reptile brain, because the medulla oblongata actually has a control center for many of our vital organ functions, such as our heart rate and our respiratory rhythm and blood pressure, things like that. So medulla oblongata is oftentimes what we call it our reptile brain, because it really will cover some of these it'll be the control center for some of these main organ functions. So I believe that is, I'm just going to double check, I believe that's all. Oh, I don't know if you need to know arbor vitae in the cerebellum. So you'll see, you'll have these areas of white matter that kind of stretch through there, and we call that our arbor vitae. So I just saw it on your handout, and I wasn't sure if you needed to cover that for this lab. So I'll double check that to make sure whether or not you need to know that, but at least I can show it to you there. And then you do have it, we do talk about it in lecture. And then we will actually talk in lecture 2 about your lateral ventricles. So here's one of the lateral ventricle that is going to fill up with some the CSF, cerebral spinal fluid there. So there's one of your lateral ventricles. And we'll talk about the flow of cerebral spinal fluid in lecture quite a bit. So I wanted to show you that you have, again, another lateral ventricle in the other half here. And I think that is all of the major structures that you needed to recognize for the lab. Yeah, so make sure that you go ahead and look through the dissection videos that I've posted for you. I did post some of those dissection videos so that you could see what this actually looks like on a brain. I wish that you were here in lab, because if you were here in lab, we would dissect a sheep's brain. But since I don't have you here in lab, the best I can do is show you the dissection videos, and you can look at those. Hopefully going through this brain first will make it a little bit easier for you to identify those certain structures on the sheep's brain. All right, thanks guys, and let me know if you have any questions.